We're just going to go again with the day, and then we'll go through discussion of concept screening criteria, examples of it, and then how we're applying it, and then next steps, and then the discussion and questions. So for packed impact, so since last month's our pack meeting, we published a Tribuna article. Uh, the article is about our listening session, which we had the past on June 9 and June 14. The listening session is open for public. We talked about how we navigate. Well, we gave them an overview of our project, but mostly on how we navigate the website. And we answered some questions from the public. It was very helpful. We also helped them, how to provide their responses or feedback with that presentation. Also, we added more concepts to the website, which you will also, there will be more concepts up and coming in the next couple days or weeks. And then early this month, we were in attendance of a pop-up event in Danbury. It's called Danbury Street Festival. This was in oh, early this month. And then we are continuing our presence with the social media accounts such as Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So if you don't mind, follow us, and I encourage you to visit our project website at i84danbury.com. So here's our list of pack member. There's no new members, so we can move on to the next. So now I will present to you Rick for the rest of our presentation.
Thanks, Kirschling.
You're welcome.
So we've all seen this before. If you recall from the agenda, we're going to first do a quick recap of the fatal flaw analysis, and then a discussion of the screening. But you may remember this process slide from previous PAC meetings. And so we're sitting here on the developing screening criteria, and this is where we have developed some fatal flaw criteria. And I'm sure that you all remember this also. We had 3 elements that were fatal flaw elements, that if a concept went through the fatal flaw screening and lacked a potential to meet the study purpose or had numerous constructability issues, technical feasibility, cost feasibility, or had unjustifiable environmental impacts, then that concept got screened out for the fatal flaw. So the fatal flaw analysis is the very beginning of applying the screening criterion. And so again, as we have gone through the white paper analysis, and you've seen most of the white papers, there's still a couple more to go up on the website, but we've looked through that, and that's where we've looked at these fatal flaw analysis or the fatal flaw issues and removed specific concepts from further analysis. So an example of one that was dropped after the fatal flaw analysis, I'm sure we all remember the tunnel, concept number 7, and the tunnel came north here between, it took off between exits 5 and 4 and came in, past exit 2 there. And there were some serious concerns with this concept. One of them was we have a water treatment plant that would be impacted. So, we've got the cost and the construction of replacing it, perhaps interrupting service. So this was a very huge environmental concern. We also had neighborhood cohesion. There's 2 major neighborhoods that were going to be completely interrupted, with many people losing their homes and being relocated. Then came some of the engineering considerations. We had constructability issues where it was a lot of material to be removed. The type of drill rig, they're few and far between in the country. They're very massive. The cost, the availability of the drill rig, the constructability issue was huge. Then we also ended up with redundant highways. We had 2 different alignments now. And what really happened with a lot of that is the maintenance. We've got a lot of maintenance costs, a lot of maintenance efforts and issues, not only on both of the highways, but now also with the proposed tunnel. So with a fatal flaw screening, I like to think of it as looking at something from 150,000 foot level. So we're looking at something from this large point of view. And then so again, we looked at the feasibility, the lack of purpose and potential to meet the study purpose, and the unjustified environmental impacts. Those are the things at this big, huge, giant level that we're looking at. Well, then you start zooming in, and now we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the concept screening criterion. And we really, at this point, would like to present some of the things that we looked at this kind of 10,000 foot level, if you will. And I'm hoping that we get a lot of comments, hand raising, unmuting, speaking. Like Marcy said, we're an informal presentation here. And we'd like to get some buy-off on, do you understand what these concepts are? Are they the right kind of screening criterion for the concepts? Are there things that we're missing? So we're going to be looking at some things such as congestion and mobility. We're going to be looking at geometry and design, different access points, our schedule and budget, impacts to properties, sensitive community cohesion, wetland and stream impacts, and sensitive species impacts. Those are just some of the areas we'll be looking at. So we've applied the screening criteria for fatal flaw. Now, if you'll recall, when we're looking at this corridor, we have noticed that there are specific issues that are associated with different segments in the corridor. So we've broken the corridor into an east segment, a west segment, a central segment, and then one that goes through the whole main line. So we are now looking at these concepts. When we are looking at the fatal flaws, we are just looking at, does this concept have any major flaw that we should not build this concept? We're now in a different mindset. We're now within each segment, we're looking at all the concepts that could solve the issues or address the issues within that segment, and we're comparing them one to another. Now, in the past, we've listed out redundancy and high impacts. We've kind of refined that concept to look at engineering considerations and environmental considerations. And under the engineering considerations, we've looked at key considerations, those that are really meet the purpose of the study, things that are very, very important, but we've also got additional engineering considerations. The environmental considerations are not too dissimilar, but they've been broken down again into built environmental considerations, residences, businesses, community facilities. Those are still environmental considerations, but they're in the built environment. And amongst those, we have key and additional. And then we also have the natural environment, key and additional. So the natural environment, obviously, are things like wetlands or sensitive species. So we're going to walk through some of these key considerations, and this could be painstaking if we hear crickets. We would love to hear from you, and I'll try and explain what the considerations mean. And if I am poor in my explanation and somebody doesn't understand, please speak up, raise your hand. So we're going to first look at key considerations, and like we mentioned, the first subtopic of that is congestion and mobility. So the first thing we're looking at, or that we have talked about and are presenting here as an issue to consider for screening. Now, like I said before, we've broken these into segments, and you can imagine that each segment has its own issues. For instance, one segment may have interchange issues where you can only get on at one street and off at another street, and it's not a complete interchange. Another one may have congestion because of a left-hand ramp that comes in and people need to move all the way from the left to the right to exit at the next exit. And so that weave, that kind of congestion. So these considerations that we're looking at as examples today are centered around the segment that we're calling the center segment. So we may not be addressing all of the issues for east, west, or main line, but these are the types of issues we're talking about. And once we go through these and get concurrence and see that we're on the right track, we'll also develop these same kinds for each one of the segments. So we're first talking about peak hour delay, and that's pretty easy to conceptualize, I believe, in if you've got free-flowing traffic and you're moving through this corridor and you have no congestion, you may be able to go through this whole corridor, I don't know, in 10 minutes. But maybe peak hour, because you've got so much traffic, whether it's morning on 84 headed westbound, evening 84 eastbound, 7 coming in and headed southbound in the morning. No matter what time of day it is, if we've got a lot of congestion, maybe that 10-minute drive goes up to 35 minutes. So we're looking at peak hour delay and also lane continuity. Lane continuity is where a driver does not have to change lanes for the through traffic. So as long as the driver is not getting on or off the highway, they don't have to change a lane if they're going continuing through. So the first opportunity I would like to present is right now, if there are questions on these, or if there are other issues that could address congestion and mobility that we haven't thought of. Now, granted, we've got a lot more of these criterion to go through under these different areas, but under these key considerations meeting the primary purpose of the study under congestion and mobility, do we agree that these are good indicators of congestion and mobility, and are there others that you have thought about? So I have the ability to shut up. I know most people on the team don't believe that, but I will be quiet and wait for a couple questions to come in.
All right, Rudy has raised his hand. So Rudy, want to time?
Sure, Rudy Marconi from Ridgefield. Question, if I may, Rick. Have you looked at future growth and business development along this corridor and the impact that they may have, both residential and commercial growth over the next 20 years?
Yes, thanks, Rudy. The study is looking at all of the past studies and the projection of growth. That's part of the study input. And if from the study we present projects that will even be more dramatically included in the project analysis. But yes, without a doubt, we are looking at the continued growth and the continued potential congestion through this route.
Right, so that your peak hour delay and your lane continuity will take into consideration traffic growth over the next 20 to 30, 34 years, 35 years.
Yeah, a lot of these studies are up to 40 years. So yeah.
Thanks. Thank you.
It might be helpful, Sharat, for you to talk about what your traffic analysis considers as well. Maybe get into a tad bit more specificity that might be helpful.
Yeah, Rudy, the projections are to 2040. That's the out year. It does extend ours, both employment growth as well as population projections. We use the census data and extract. And in fact, one of the key players here is New York. So we work with the New York MPO to get their projections and kind of match their projections to the extent we can, especially as you know, since you're in Ridgefield, there's a lot of cross traffic between New York and Connecticut. So I think, trying to get those projections in and making sure they work at least at the state line and account for the future growth is part of the projection.
Thank you, Sharat.
All right. Rick, I have one other question coming in from Francis Pickering from Westcog. Francis?
Thanks. Are you considering looking at travel time reliability in this as an engineering consideration, or does that correlate highly with peak hour delay?
I'm gonna let our traffic guy Sharad answer that one.
So we will, Francis. Right now we are, we're doing the concept screening. When we get into combining these concepts and getting into those combinations that Rick was talking about with the west and the east and the center and the main, we will get into a little bit more defined. These are very high level metrics right now, but we'll get into like buffer time index, playing time index, TTI and other metrics, that FHWA recommends in terms of national performance measures. But right now we are kind of keeping it at a very high level to look at something that is easy to grasp, which is peak hour delay,
All right, Tom from Danbury, you also have your hand raised.
I just wondered if under this section, engineering considerations, are you actually looking also at the actual road design or highway design issues? The two items you mentioned are, clearly traffic engineering issues, but I mean, in terms of the grades of the roads and the low, there are actual whether it's practical to build these alternatives. So I mean, I think that's very important on a lot of these designs here.
Yeah, Tom, we do have a whole section on geometry where we are looking at those things, and we'll talk about some of the issues that can address, some of the considerations that can address those issues. So,
but even beyond geometry, in terms of the grading, the feasibility. The other thought I had is this item congestion and mobility just for I-84, or are you referring to city streets also? Because obviously we talked about the exit 6 where we talked in depth about on-ramps and off-ramps there to deal with the city's congestion and mobility. Is that included in this section or some other section?
We're looking at all of the feeder roads and the local roads as well, so that we don't impact the city roads. But the main considerations here are for the project through flow for 84 and 7. But it is, all of these are being taken in. You'll also see some of the considerations are the local roadways. Those are some of the considerations that are being looked at as we go through the screening. So we don't want to put in a new design for a new interchange and all of a sudden cause horrible backup on local city roads. So that is one of our additional considerations, Tom.
Okay, thank you.
You bet, thank you.
All right, Rick, I have 2 more questions. The first is from Chris. Hi, Chris.
Hey, everyone. Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so I just wanted to say too that I've spoke with Marcy and Sharad and Andy too, kind of a lot about some more specific details that we haven't even gotten into yet in the committee or on the committee. But I just want to say that I really like the ideas that have been presented so far. I think the ones that were kind of migrating too slowly, which will end up, I think, being the ones that the project ends up following and ends up designing. But I think that the ideas are good. I think that a lot of what some of the other project members had said is a very hot topic that I think we'll cover as time goes on, like the grading and the geometry of the highway. Like I know I just spoke with Sharad about that, and he did assure me that that's something that's going to be taken care of, but just we're not there yet as a committee. We just haven't gotten to that stage. But I do think that these are really good ideas, and from everyone that I've spoke with and told these ideas about, I think that they're all very much on board with the direction that we're going and also the ideas that we have. So I think that, apart from what everyone's asking, which are all great questions, I think that we're on a really good path, and everyone that I've spoke with has positive feedback for me. So I just wanted to put that out there with what we've been talking about.
Chris, I not only want to thank you for that, but I really like to hear that you've gone back out to the community, to the people that you work with, and gotten that kind of feedback and brought to the committee. So I appreciate that. That's perfect.
I appreciate that too.
Thank you.
All right, James, you're up next. I see you have your hand raised.
I'm on. I'm sorry. I just unmuted myself. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yes, you can.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to ask. I probably should have been paying closer attention. Rick is with SLR. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Wasn't sure. And did SLR, did they take over from Malone and McBroom, or was that a different function? Or
I'll chime in on that. So yeah, James, I started with Malone McBroom in 1994. And I've been sitting in the same office for about the last 16 years. In January of 2020, Malone McBroom merged with a company known as SLR. And so we are one and the same. We're in the same offices with the same people, but we're a bigger and now national and international company.
okay. What do we know what SLR stands for?
there are many amusing stories, and all of them are folklore. And so, but the simple answer is it does not stand for anything.
Okay. Where are they based?
So our corporate headquarters is in the UK, in England. And we are, not to make this all about SLR, but we're in 5 different regions: Canada, the United States, Europe, Asia Pacific, specifically in Australia, and South Africa. In the United States, the office where I sit in Cheshire, Connecticut, is our largest of all of our offices throughout the US.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I mean, previously Malone McBroom, they were kind of handling the environmental and sustainability part of this. Is that still the case?
Same team, yes, absolutely. And so I've been involved with this project since 2016, when we were originally retained. I am the PM from the SLR side, was on the MMI side. So there's been continuity. You only see a few of our faces, but there's a team of people working with us, and that is the very same team.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it'll be hard to switch people midstream, regardless what happens. So certainly back to you, Rick. So this what you're talking about, I guess I understand it's a new phase of the review, but I mean this seems to be talking about the hardcore engineering and logistics. So I guess to answer your question, as far as other elements or missing elements, I hate to be singing the same song. I just don't see anything. I don't see anything on the environment or social or.
But we're getting there.
We're getting there.
All right.
So
all right. Okay.
hang in there with us.
Will do.
But the reason you see a new name and a new face with me is the SLR MMI team brought me into this project about a year ago, and so I've been involved with it for about a year. So that's why the SLR Rick Black may have thrown some people, but it's the same team behind us all.
Thank you.
Okay.
So if there's no more.
No, there are more.
Oh.
All right. So I have 2 more hands raised that people who want to speak up. The first is Chris, and the second is Frank. And then we also have Rudy. So Chris, why don't you chime in?
Yeah, I'll just make this quick because I know we want to try and wrap this up and continue. But so for Janine, I just want to talk about generally, kind of off the record, from what you've seen so far with these designs, is it looking like there's going to be an environmental hurdle? Because I know there's I think it said at one point like 68 or 52, something like that, bridges through this corridor that are going to have to be revamped, and then there's also design and curvature and geometry issues that we're going to have to talk about too. But like from an environmental standpoint, what's your take? I want to kind of.
So this is going to be a very unfulfilling answer, but it's just too early to make that call. The screening analysis by its very nature is going to screen out those, environmental sort of deal breakers in terms of things that are so egregious that we won't even consider the options further. But part of this, and we would call them, I think Rick referred to them as unjustifiable environmental impacts. So as we go through the screening process, at every single level, we're going to be looking at the environmental impacts, and we will get there. Rick's going to go through the engineering, and then we're going to hop onto the environmental. And at any point along that screening process, if we look at something and we say this is a hurdle too big to cross, those will be identified. But there's a lot more work that needs to be done to fully evaluate the environmental implications to be able to answer that question. We're just way too early in the process.
And just to add to that, Janine, just to kind of flesh it out a little bit more, to address your concern or to speak to your point, the environmental considerations will include social So it's the built and the natural environment. So we'll go first through these engineering considerations, different access points and road geometry. And then we'll look at the environmental, both the built and the natural, and the built environmental includes the social impacts. Once this becomes project-based, we'll even be looking at socioeconomic impacts and that kind of stuff. But that's a ways down the road. So we're just looking, we've gone from that 150,000 foot level. Now we're going to be down at this 10,000 foot level, looking at different issues that could screen out because of, as Jeanine puts it, environmental deal breakers. And then once we are left with concepts that are reasonable, feasible to build, then we'll start looking again at could these be put together in a project, and if so, what are the very specific environmental and redundant issues that we need to deal with.
Cool. Thanks for the info. I appreciate it.
You bet.
All right. So Frank Salvatore, I saw that you had your hand raised, but then you lowered it. Perhaps.
I'm going to defer my question because I read the project, the presentation. I have a question. It's probably going to come up around screen 41. So I'm going to keep this going.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Thank you. And Rudy,
so Marcy, there's, all right, just wanted to, there's also a question from Barry on the email that I forwarded you. So.
Okay. Let's let Rudy speak now, and then
sure, very quickly. I know I don't want to take up a lot of time, but relative to other modes of transportation, the development of those considerations been given?
Yes, we're looking at all of the multimodal, bike, ped, buses, all that, and one of the things that we're hoping to be able to do is apply those types of things to every single concept that moves forward. So no matter what the project may be, we want to incorporate those elements into it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy.
Shrat, do you want me to address Barry's questions now, or do you want to wait?
Let's just wait, and maybe Barry, if you can hang on, we'll probably go to the engineering one and the environmental, and then we can address your question.
All right, perfect. All right, so let's move on, Rick. You're free to move forward.
Why, thank you, Marcy. So along with those engineering considerations with mobility and congestion, we have some additional considerations. And the first one that we looked at was the access to Danbury Hospital. I'm going to flip through several of these. They're all access, but then I want to open it up to see if I'm missing something. So we got access to the Danbury Hospital, access to businesses on North Street, accesses to downtown Danbury. So let me go through one more because this has been brought up earlier, and that's improves the local network. And then also we want to look at maintaining I-84 traffic during construction. So this really has three kind of subsections to it. The accesses are these considerations that are important in when we're choosing one concept over another in the selection, the screening criterion. Is access to Danbury Hospital, access to businesses on North Street, accesses to Danbury, downtown Danbury, are those important? And we've talked about improving local network, so the local roadway network. And then last of all, maintenance of traffic during the construction of any project. If, for instance, if we chose the tunnel that was a fatal flaw, we could have complete access on the redundant roadway while the tunnel was being built. But if we wanted to, for instance, this is not a concept, so do not hold me to this, but if we wanted to double stack the road, could we actually build a new stack on top of the existing I-84 and maintain construction or not? So those are the types of considerations in maintaining the traffic during construction. So I'm going to shut up again and wait for questions. Are these five considerations important when we're looking at our environmental considerations?
All right, I already have one hand raised, Rick.
Beautiful.
Oh, wait, no, now there's two. The first is from Chris.
So I've spoke with Danbury about this because I live in Danbury. I've spoken with, the highway department and the engineering people inside of that. And one of my biggest concerns, also one of the biggest concerns from my friends, constituents, coworkers, whatever, people that I speak to this about is, and also it's also been mentioned inside of this meeting so far, what is going to be done inside of Danbury to kind of improve the local network itself? Unfortunately, we haven't gotten any answers at all from the city. We've gotten a little bit of pushback here specifically from them saying, well, the city doesn't like this, and that, but we haven't gotten any answers from the city as to what they're going to do or how they're going to improve the structure. Because the problem is that a lot of this comes from a poor city of Danbury infrastructure. You have roads that haven't been widened, you have intersections that haven't been improved, you have lights that are old that need to be updated. For example, the Main Street light sometimes could take a very long time. Why? Because it's not calibrated correctly. It's an old light. And so I think a lot of us have these questions, what's going to be done along this like inner line? Like I know I've talked to Sharad about this and Marcy a little bit about a connectivity, like a collector distributor road. But that was only really mentioned for a brief bit, and there are some engineering and some traffic concerns behind it too, but I haven't heard any other real considerations behind it. So I wanted to get the take from the PAC members themselves. I know there's going to be probably a lot of people that maybe have comments about this, but also from the people running the meeting as well.
Yeah, Chris, let me take the first swap at that, if I may. This is a corridors planning study to look at the issues. So we're at this 150,000 foot, we're looking at this big planning for this whole corridor. So the network will come into it at this level, looking at can we improve something, or are we going to worsen the conditions as we look at solving issues along this I-84 Danbury corridor. What we hope that comes out of it is a myriad of projects that would come from the planning. We say from the planning, we have heard from the PAC, we have heard from the local users of the facilities that we have a bad timing light on North Street. Well, that could be one of the projects that comes out of it, but that is way down the line still. We are looking at crayon drawings, rough concepts, and we are trying to understand if this concept improves what the issues, the needs and deficiencies that have been identified on or throughout this corridor. So the local network is not a target of the I-84 improvement of an I-84 improvement project, but it definitely could be a tangential project that comes out of the planning study. And then it'll all depend on, is that federally funded? Is it city funded? So these are issues that will come on later, but the planning concept is to address all the issues through this whole corridor, which would in part be the tie into the local network. Now, Sharad, do you have stuff that you would like to add for the whole PAC?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to echo on what you're saying, Rick. I mean, these are criteria that we're going to look to screen concepts. So I think to the level of detail that how well it improves the local network, it's going to be very hard at this point until these are taken further into the process. But we'll certainly be looking at those access points from the highway onto the local network. And as you said, Rick, I mean, we want to make sure that any improvements on the highway and connections from the highway to the local network are not making them function worse than what they are.
Right.
And to the extent possible, to make those access points improved. And that's kind of where this process is right now at a very early level. When we get into the next phase where it gets into a little bit more engineering and design on some of these access points, that's kind of where a lot of those things will be looked at more on the larger network.
Can I just interject? So you're right, and I understand that. My concern is just that the city hasn't really shown like these are good concepts, at least just with the concern to the 8 corridor itself. Like, for example, the last committee, the city had mentioned, that the idea, there were some concerns around the idea, but generally it was okay. But that's as far as we really got with the city. And so, like you said before, we don't want to have a highway where most people are getting on the highway because that's their only choice. And that's what we have right now in Danbury. We could get a lot of highway traffic pulled off the highway if you have people that don't just get on from 5 to 4 or from 4 to 3. You know what I mean? Instead, you have other roads that allow them to stay off the road, and you allow that New York State traffic, that Newtown traffic, the Richfield traffic, whatever, New Milford traffic to stay on the road, because that's going to be the traffic, the long distance traffic, where you have the shorter traffic, which, obviously I think is causing some of the disruption now. But the city hasn't shown any interest in really improving or giving any ideas. Like, we've gone through this whole project and we have great ideas about the corridor itself. But again, we can fix the corridor to its most extent. But if the mainline issues in the city itself aren't fixed, then I think we're still running into a little bit of a wall. So, has anyone reached out to the city of Danbury? Have we gotten more feedback into what they're going to do to try and pull some of these people off? Is this a good idea? Because I haven't gotten any feedback from the city at all. And the last thing I want to do is to go through this whole idea. We go through 6 months of it, and then we find out, okay, well, this isn't really going to work from the city standpoint. We need to move on to something else, and we're kind of back to square one.
Marcy or Sharat, you want to take the coordination?
I can say, Chris, the city of Danbury is an active participant on this PAC, and they're here today. They're hearing what you have to say, and we also meet with them separately. We have had several stakeholder meetings with them, and Sharat, you can chime in, but yeah. I will say they are hearing what you're saying. That's the whole purpose of this PAC.
Yeah, and Chris, I think just not to kind of drag this discussion into this meeting, but I think, we have had meetings, and Amira and Tom are on the call, and Sharon's on the call too. So we have, did I lose you guys? Okay. I saw someone was leaving. So we do have meetings with them frequently, and we have met with them more recently in early May. So there's been really positive conversations between us and the city. We're working together. In fact, there are some ideas that were thrown out by the city that we are looking at. So it's a working, we are not yet to the end solution here. I think there's a lot of things that need to be worked out. We are, again, at the planning level. And there's a process that we have to follow that will lead to ultimately things that you're discussing that have to happen. So
cool. Right. Yeah, that's it. I appreciate that. I appreciate all the info, and I appreciate you saying that there is some positive feedback, because I hadn't even heard that on my end. So thank you.
Thank you.
Right. So I have 4 more people that want to chime in, and I'm going to start with Francis, then go to Rudy, then Alec, and then Tom from the city. So if you can all hold tight, let's start with Francis.
Did we lose the presentation? I can't see the presentation on my screen.
No.
Oh, really?
It went away, Rick.
Yeah. It did go away. I thought that was on purpose.
Nope, I see it on mine. Let me end it here on mine and reinitiate.
Just share your screen, Rick.
And
I was just making sure the presentation is not done yet. So.
Well, no.
And Francis, once we get our end sorted out, you can start chiming in.
Yeah.
There you go. And I might just say one other thing while we're at it. At some point, it may be beneficial for the PAC members for us to kind of go through the next batch of both engineering and environmental considerations, and then take the rest of the comments, just because I think some of the questions will be answered with what we're about to present.
Great. Thanks, Marcy and Janine. 2 comments. One in response to Chris's. WestCog is aware of the circulation issues in Danbury, and as well as in our other central city, Stamford and Norwalk. And we have been discussing the need for city circulation studies to look at circulation issues on the surface streets in the city. So that is a concept right now that may advance independently of this, but be complementary to it. And second, and looking at access, it looks like the list of engineering considerations are accessing areas that are challenging to access right now. So I'd have 2 points. One is we don't want to worsen access to locations right now that are not inconvenient to access. And second, there may be a case for improving access to the eastern side of Danbury between exits 6 and 8. The Federal Road area, maybe Great Plain Road. Right now, Federal Road and Route 7, the 84 interchange just creates a lot of unnecessary movement that could be simplified potentially through a more direct connection between Federal Road and I-84.
All right. Thank you. Good points. We look forward to hearing what circulation studies may be advertised soon. Rudy, you're next on our list.
Yeah, thank you very much. A quick question relative to access to Danbury Hospital. Currently, it takes our ambulances anywhere from 20 to 30 in moderate traffic, and then 30 to 40 with heavy traffic and having to take city routes and staying off 84. My question specifically is the access to Danbury Hospital. Will that be a limited access highway? In other words, emergency vehicles only? Or is that going to be open to public traffic as well, with the eventuality that that will only delay access to the hospital again?
So Rudy, we need to remember, once again, we need to drop back just a hair. And this is the planning study. And what we're looking for is this an important consideration when we're looking to screen criteria? So we don't have a solution on saying, yeah, we're going to have a dedicated emergency only off ramp or anything like that. We're just saying, we're asking the question, is access to Danbury Hospital one of the considerations that should be used in screening, keeping in a concept or screening one out? So
well, then my answer would be absolutely yes. Thank you very much.
That's what we're looking for, that kind of feedback.
That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Rudy.
All right, Alec, you're up next.
Thanks. I guess one quick question. Will traffic safety be a screening criteria, or is that kind of wrapped up in lane continuity and some of the other ones that all end up producing safety?
That's a beautiful question, because that's one of the points I was going to talk about. So you're exactly right. It will be addressed, and it will be addressed because everything Federal Highways or ConnDOT does is done with the safety factor in mind. So for instance, reducing weaves, maintaining lane continuity, maintaining consistent corridor speeds, all of that has a safety component in mind as the design goes forward.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Alex. And Tom, you're the last person that we have raising our hand. Tom, you are with the city, so I'm not sure if you're responding to some of the earlier comments or just stating your own.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to state that, that during our technical meetings with your group, several departments here agreed that the priority really, from our point of view, was for at exit 6 again, for an on-ramp onto I-84 West and an off-ramp from I-84 East at exit 6. We feel that that's going to address substantial issues within the city of Danbury and also provide us with the access to the hospital. So I just wanted to clarify that, that in our minds, that should really be at the top of that previous list you had. There was on and off ramps at exit 6. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. All right, Rick, I'm done with what I have for now. You're ready to move on.
Now we're going to go on to geometry. And some of the considerations we're looking at on geometry is the distance between adjacent ramps. So, is this important? Federal Highways has a minimum distance of 1 mile between ramps. There are exceptions that could be done. Is this an important consideration when screening criterion, using it as a screening criterion when screening concepts? Does it meet driver expectation? And that's, are there if I'm going to get off at exit 6, can I get back on at exit 6? If I'm going to get off at Great Plains, can I get back on at Great Plains? so full highway access. Removal of the left-hand ramps. Is this an important consideration as we move forward? As I mentioned before, maintaining consistent design speed through the corridor are these. So these four fall under our subcategory of geometry under additional considerations. And I would like to open it up to see if these are important to us to continue, or if we've missed something under geometry for considerations.
Apparently we nailed it, Rick.
Yeah.
Finally.
Comments, no raised hands, Rick.
But I absolutely love the discussion that this is generating. So thank you. All right. So the last one is schedule and budget, and it's the construction complexity, staging, meaning, we would look at maybe closing the left portion of a highway while improving the right hand, or vice versa, or staging between these interchanges and leaving free flow on the other ones. So it's the complexity of construction. Again, it's one of the reasons why the tunnel dropped out. But this and construction cost, are they important considerations when looking at screening criterion for each segment? So I'm hoping that silence says yes, and if you hated them, you'd yell out at me. So we've just looked at key consideration.
Rick,
yep.
Rick, we do have a
Wait,
couple of
we have a
hands.
few comments.
Oh, perfect.
No, don't go too fast.
No, just trying to keep it moving.
We have 3 people who have raised their hands and want to speak. Chris is first, Frank is second, and Rudy is third. So Chris, chime in.
So I just wanted to quickly touch base on the construction costs and the kind of overall scheduling of that as well. So how did you come up with the construction costs to begin with? How are we even kind of going about figuring that out, I guess?
Yeah, there's a couple things going on here. Remember, this is a planning study, that big picture look at the whole area, not project. But we do have ranges of costs for different aspects. Like a CD road, a collector distributor road, is going to be a lot more expensive than if we were restriping a highway. Those types of things. We also know that with one concept or another concept, if it's a whole interchange, if we have to take down an interchange and completely rebuild it to a divergent diamond or some other structure, well, that's going to have some expense. We also know things like, if it's going to be impacting businesses, and we'll go through this in environmental considerations, but these are really, really big picture numbers. So when we're looking at construction cost, let's just say, again, I am using completely fictitious concepts. Let's just say through the center segment, there's a potential for a CD road, a collector distributor road, that would really improve the congestion and mobility through this segment. Let's say that takes some properties, businesses, but man, does it really improve. And I'm just going to order of magnitude, pick a stupid number. Let's say it's $100 million. Let's say to not do that, another concept without a collector distributor is going to go through a bunch more homes, a bunch more properties. And let's say that instead of $100 million, it's $90 million. Well, what is the difference in that cost? That cost is not going to have a strong influence on the decision, but taking out a whole lot more houses or businesses might have a larger impact in the decision making. So we're looking more at order of magnitude. The tunnel was horribly expensive compared to restriping a highway or adding an interchange someplace. So we're looking at orders of magnitude are the only real cost considerations, because everything else is going to be such a thumbnail sketch at such a general level that there is no real, and if it's federal highways, says if it would be reasonable for an investor in a business to make this kind of investment, then it's reasonable for us. It's not a prohibitive number unless it is orders of magnitude different from one that serves the same purpose. Does that start addressing that cost question?
So Rick, let me just summarize everything you said.
Please.
For Chris. I think the costs, Chris, are based on roadway costs and structure costs. And when we look at these concepts in a very high level order of magnitude, like Rick was saying, we basically are quantifying all the, quantifying the data in terms of how much roadway width, how much roadway quantity, how many structures there are. So we are kind of taking all that into account, and they're, as in the PAC presentations in the past, you have said these are based on today's construction dollars. So certainly this is not projected at this level. We're not looking at $2040. This is $2020. So this is, again, looking at those quantities for each of these different concepts. And as we refine this, as we go to the next phase in the process, these costs will be refined and there'll be more detail into it.
Especially once we get to project alternatives, there'll be a lot better costing analysis.
Cool. I appreciate the info you gave me. That definitely answers my question.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. All right, Frank, you're next.
Yeah, I mean, the construction complexity and staging, I think, really has to be on here, especially looking at some of the comments earlier in this meeting and from other meetings. The city of Danbury can't handle you guys doing construction during the day and all those cars coming off of the highway going through the city of Danbury. So staging, I think, is extremely important in engineering considerations, and it's something that has to be considered.
Frank, thank you. That's a great comment. Appreciate that input.
All right, so the one other thing is, Rudy, you had your hand raised, but you lowered it. Is there anything, was your question addressed? All right, I'm not hearing from him, so let's move on.
All right, perfect. So we're going to go through the same kind of exercise here. We've done the engineering. Now we're going to look at the environmental considerations. And we're going to start with the built environment and the key built considerations. And the first one on that is property impacts, whether they're residential or whether they're businesses. We will be looking at things like, can you leave the function of that business or that home and take a sliver of the property? Or would the whole business or residence or multiple family residents need to be relocated for this concept to go forward? So that's property impacts. We also have dead-end streets. I think Janine on the last PAC really went over this point well, that we all would like to live in a cul-de-sac on a dead-end street if our neighborhood is foreplanned for cul-de-sacs and dead ends. If they're large enough for emergency vehicles to turn around, and if the community is developed around these dead-end streets. But if we have to cut off a free flow through a street for a concept to be built, we not only interrupt community cohesion, but we can also be making emergency access or emergency response almost impossible. So that's one of the considerations we're looking at. We're looking at environmental justice, neighborhood impacts. Environmental justice is an old federal highways law that does not allow a project to disproportionately impact minority communities, whether that's race or financial or whatever. And so we're looking at the disproportional impacts. In other words, you can't have a bunch of rich white people yell and say, I don't want the road through my highway, go put it over at that financially challenged neighborhood and take out that neighborhood. That can't happen. So we're looking at the disproportional impacts to environmental justice neighborhoods. So again, our built environment and our key considerations. Are we missing something? Have you seen something that raises a question? Have I explained it properly? If not, we'll move on to the next.
I don't have any questions, Rick. I think we're ready to move on.
Okie doke. So then we've got, under the built, we've got additional considerations. We've got community facility impacts. You know, is this going to be impacting, you know, a community park, a community gathering spot? 4F. Now, 4F is also a federal highways term. That means, are we going to impact any wildlife, any cemeteries, anything done with public funding, any parks, that kind of facility? We also have visual and aesthetic impacts. Am I going to be building a road that there has been a property, say a park has been built because of this incredible view shed, and is my highway now going to be elevated and go right in the middle of the view shed and impact that? Are there visual or aesthetic impacts? And then very specifically, because this corridor has been built so tightly around existing cemeteries, are there cemetery property impacts? So these are the additional considerations we have proposed to analyze concepts, to select concepts or screen concepts in the built environment. Again, the question is, did I explain them well enough? And do you have others that you want added to this? Our next segment, just as a forewarning, is the same exercise, but through the natural environment.
All right, Rick, we do have some hands raised.
Perfect.
So I have James, Francis, and then Rick. So James, chime in.
Yeah, this is.
You started speaking and then we lost you.
Correct. So James, we're going to put you on pause for the moment and we'll keep you in the loop. But Francis, maybe you can chime in.
Yes, thank you. At this point, are you only considering negative impacts, or are you also considering positive impacts? And also, will you be considering potential mitigation strategies?
So that's a great question. Impacts are defined as positive and negative. So if there's, for instance, an opportunity to expand a park space or whatever, that's also considered a positive impact. I'm sorry, I lost your second portion of that question.
Will you be considering mitigation strategies for negative impacts?
No, because this is a planning level. Okay, here's an example that Sharat and I have had discussions on. If we had two concepts and we looked at them and they required widening of a highway, which means there's going to be a toe of slope, we can't look at things like adding retaining walls to shorten up that toe of slope so we don't impact something, because we can't go through all the mitigation because this isn't a project. This is a crayon drawing on a map to say, oh my gosh, this is going right through a cemetery. We don't want to do that. So mitigation will come if projects are identified and concepts are put together as a viable project, and then an alternative analysis, and then we'll say, oh, we're going to impact, you know, a 10-foot swath and the monument into the cemetery. A, can we avoid any of that? If not, can we mitigate by putting a new entry someplace in the cemetery property? Or C, can we enhance it by offering new property someplace else with a whole new beautiful overhead drive-through into the cemetery? So that mitigation will come further down after there's projects and true impacts have been identified. These are crayon drawings on a big map that says oh, if we do this, we're going right through a cemetery. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I do want to say, there's a couple of we have a couple of hand raised, Rick, but there's a few things in the chat that I just want to read out loud, so they're on record.
Yep.
So when Francis spoke at 1:15, so not this time, but the last time, Chris agreed with him and then Francis said just a couple of minutes ago, with respect to geometry, I would suggest considering shoulder breakdown lanes. This is important not only for emergency vehicles access, for example, ambulances going to and from the hospital, but also that disabled vehicles may get out of the way from and have less impact from the traffic flow. And then one more comment that came in is Perry came in just recently, and he said, I'm joining now. I was pulled away. And so people are happy to have him here. And so Alex just said, shoulder breakdown lanes also are good for tow trucks and safety. So there seems to be some support for that. So we will note that in our notes. And
let me just quickly address that too, that is part of all the concept analysis. Is it hasn't been specifically listed as consideration, but that is being considered. So
but
thank you,
clearly
Marcy.
We're hearing that and we'll note it. And then I have one more raised hand, and that's from Rick Schreiner.
Rick?
Yeah. Beyond cemeteries, is there any consideration here for general historic preservation impacts?
Yes, that is definitely one of them. We want to avoid historic impacts. If this goes to projects and alternatives are chosen, there will be huge coordination and consultation with the State Historic Preservation Office to make sure that we are avoiding all historic properties. And if we cannot avoid either historic or prehistoric, what kind of mitigation will be taken. So that is a very strong consideration.
Can I just add to that, at the beginning of this project, we did an extensive amount of work to identify existing conditions within the I-84 corridor, including historic properties. So we know where those hotspots are. And, we will be well aware if any of the concepts intersect with them. Thus far, we haven't had any for the alternatives for the concepts rather that we've looked at, but that is absolutely in our view shed.
And I think that also makes me realize one thing was a little misorganized. Well, I don't know. You got prehistoric and historic under historic and cultural, and I believe those are under I guess it's under additional built considerations is where we're going to talk about it. But that was one of the actual consideration line items we have there. So.
All right, I know we want to move on, but we do have one more question.
Perfect.
Comment from Chris.
So I just want to know if there's been any consideration in terms of the build and how it could be enhanced to maybe prevent wildlife from getting onto the highway. I know we don't generally have a large issue with that through the 84 Danbury corridor specifically. I think it's a little bit larger in Newtown and into New York State. But I think part of that is, at least from exits 1 to 3, is because of the new lights installed. I think the LED lights, they're brighter, they're wider, and we've seen less, at least for me driving, because I live in that area, I've seen less animals on the road in my experience. But is there any like consideration at all or focus on that when we develop this, or is that something that kind of just comes with the details?
So Chris, that's a good question. When we go into the natural, that's one of the things we have as consideration. But at this planning level, the only thing that we would look at is, for instance, is this highway crossing a migration corridor, a known migration corridor, or those kind of things, not just the individual raccoon or something like that. But once it gets, again, to a project level and you're looking at alternatives, the State Wildlife Department will get involved, and we will talk about, is there a way that this new facility, this new interchange, this widened highway, these new accesses if they have a consideration that if it's brought up in any kind of a scoping or comment meeting, it will be addressed in what is called the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, for a project. It will then be completely discussed with the appropriate agencies and any mitigation for that's required. But at this planning level, those are not considerations being looked at.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You bet.
All right, Rick, I think you need to, keep moving so we can be done.
So under additional built considerations, we're looking at the impacts to the natural gas pipeline. Here's our historic property impacts. I'm going to flip, no, because that's the end of the built. So if we have no questions on these, I'm going to go on to the natural. Bingo. All right, so now we got the natural environment. We're going to go through key considerations and additional. Key considerations are going to include wetland impacts, stream impacts, impacts to habitat for state-listed species, and then impacts to, of course, sensitive species. Specifically, we've heard the long-eared bat and the bog turtle are of consideration. Wildlife, again, general wildlife would be addressed in a NEPA document, compliance with the NEPA process, if there's a project. But at this higher level, like Janine said on the historic, there's been a lot of upfront work done to identify where wetlands are, where sensitive species are, where cultural and historic sensitive sites are. And so as we've taken the crayon and drawn through the map, we try and thread and avoid these, but there is not at this point, this concept has 3.12 acres of wetland impacts, where this one has 3.13. There's no precision, no measurement. It's just, oh my gosh, that goes right through the middle of an important wetland, or, oh, we can avoid the wetland on this concept. It's at that level of screening that we're looking at. So are there any discussion points around these key natural environmental considerations?
Or are there others that we've somehow missed?
Or are there others we've missed?
We have Chris.
Say that again.
Chris, you
What
have your
happened?
hand raised.
Oh, I did not. My bad. That was from last time. I'll lower
Oh.
it.
Okay,
No, my
okay.
fault.
All right, let's
perfect.
keep moving, Rick.
Awesome. So then we've got additional natural environmental considerations. We got the floodplains. We've got impacts to other critical environmental areas, which is a very specific definition. And that then ends up with our environmental considerations. Now, I am not going to move on till somebody says I can, but we've got a few more slides we'd like to bust through on the process. So are there any other environmental considerations we've missed that would be very useful in screening in or out concepts, one amongst another?
James.
James?
Yes, James he has his hand raised. But he also has, oh, there you are. Hello?
I just wanted to, James, I want to add a possibility of noise in relation to the highway, both the construction and when it's built, increased traffic. Danbury's a pretty densely populated place.
So I'm going to jump in on, oh, I'm sorry.
You go ahead. I've talked enough.
I'm going to jump in on this one. So noise is crucially important and absolutely will be looked at. We've done baseline noise studies. These concepts are not developed to the point where we could do noise modeling, but noise modeling will absolutely be done in the future as we consider projects. We're just not there yet. And these, as Rick has said a couple of times, these are too preliminary to be able to do that level of detailed analysis. It is absolutely coming.
Okay, thanks. I just want to mention, were considerations about local businesses being affected by construction and operation, was that mentioned earlier? Because I just remember doing a smaller project up at Essex 6, some long-standing businesses there were driven out of business. Deep's Hardware comes to mind.
So we've got two things that we've addressed and one that we will address. We've addressed access to businesses, and we've addressed property impacts that will be both residential and commercial. The one that will be addressed once a project is built or is chosen to be built, and we're looking at specific alternatives, is that socioeconomic analysis on functionality and can a business still continue to function, et cetera. So yes, those are being considered at this level at a high viewpoint. And if a project gets put forward, then they will be looked at very specifically.
And does that include construction?
You bet.
Construction phase? Okay.
You bet.
Thank you.
You bet. All right.
All
so
right. You can move on.
We've gone through those. Now this is where we are going next. We are looking at examples of a process. Now, in this conceptual example, we're going to present two methods that could be used to rate any one of these considerations. So we're going to, again, this is an example, a conceptual example of applying a rating criterion. So again, we've got a potential of 4 segments: main line, center, east, and west. We've been talking about potential considerations to solve issues or to address issues in the center segment. Let's all put on our imagination hats, and we've got 4 concepts that have been put forth that we want to screen one against another in the center segment. That's concept A, B, C, and D. So we're going to look in this example only at congestion mobility, only at peak hour morning travel time. We can do one of two things. We can say that our rating criterion, we're going to use green, yellow, and red, are a really good alternative or good concept, will decrease our travel time during that peak congested hours in the morning. The yellow says, it doesn't worsen it. And the red may say, oh, it worsens it. It increases our time. So that's one way, this qualitative analysis of just generally looking. And we then would assign A, B, C, and D separate criterion. It'll either go a green, yellow, or a red. Now, the other way that could be looked at is a semi-quantitative. Now, we aren't at the point where we can give Sharad all this fabulous information and he can detail a travel, a motion study and a travel study that gives us specific times, but we can do a back of the napkin, larger scale. And let's just say, again, using that peak hour morning travel time as our key consideration in this conceptual example, that green, oh my gosh, we're increasing our travel time during congestion by 25 minutes from point A to point B. Or it's between 10 and 25, or it's worse than 10. So the red doesn't kick it out automatically. The red is just worse than green or yellow. So it doesn't stop the process like a stoplight, but it just is not the best choice. So these are the two the two ways we could go about looking at these different concepts. And then we would assign, obviously. So some things that you've seen in the past. So we've gone through our fatal flaw, and in this, again, example, our main line dropped 1, our west dropped 1, our center dropped 2, our east dropped 1. And then we go through these engineering considerations and drop some. I'm going to pass through here real quick. And then our environmental drops some. So in this pretend situation, we end up with one mainline concept that made it through the screening process with the criteria we just talked about and with a rating criterion process that we will refine and bring back to you guys. Then in the West, 2 concepts make it through, the center 1, the east 2. The next steps will be then we will combine the segments. So you can see an example where On the east segment, we are going to, the perfect concept that made it through all the screening says we're going to expand five lanes to the north. But on the west, we're going to expand 5 lanes to the south. Well, how do you make that all work? Will those combinations work? So in our pretend example here, we have 1 main line, 1 center, 2 west, and 2 east that would lead us to 4 segment combinations that we would then look at. Those segment combinations fit here into this concept segment combination screening. And they then would go through a similar set of screening combinations. Are they feasible? Do they work together well? Will that west be expanded to the north and the east expanded to the south? Can you meet up in between? Does it work? Does it address congestion mobility? Are there engineering or impact considerations we need to look at? And once we come up with one, let's say 3 out of 4 make it through this screening, those could be put into that detailed environmental analysis that will be coming next steps, the NEPA analysis, as 3 of the potential ranges of alternatives. Other alternatives can come up during that NEPA analysis, but that's where these will fold into. So this, again, is the whole process that we're looking at. And I think that opens it up for my end of the presentation to take final questions, and then we'll get into next steps in the process.
So Rick, this is Neil Patel. Just for purposes of keeping to the time, I just want to make sure that we honor everybody's schedules because we're coming up on the end of the meeting. So if we could quickly just go to that process and timeline slide, we'll cover that real quick because I want to get to that discussions and questions, and a lot of good feedback. Thank you. That was a good discussion, I think. You know, one of the things that as those questions were coming in, I felt as if, boy, I really wanted to show this slide up first, just to make sure everybody understands that we are at that high level planning analysis, as you can see here. So again, we are wrapping up, as Rick said, we are wrapping up those concepts and going into the screening process. We're on track to finish that. The screening and the analysis by the end of 2022. And the next phases, as you can see here, the recommendations for a much more complex project, a longer term project is probably something where you're going to have to do a detailed environmental study, that NEPA phase that Rick was talking about, which really does include a lot more analysis and detail to see what those impacts are. On the other hand, we're also hoping to identify some near-term projects that are a little more or less complex that can maybe be initiated and progress on a quicker time frame. So if you want to go to the next slide, in terms of the next steps, we kind of covered that in terms of finalizing the screening criteria, screening those segments, those concept segments, as Rick mentioned, and then developing that reasonable range of alternatives. That's going to really get us to that point where we can move forward with that environmental study phase. So we still have a lot of work to do, and then throughout the process, the public outreach will continue. So I just want to make sure that was mentioned. But the next PAC meeting, I guess we're shooting for is in I would say like early fall, because we want to keep the momentum going. So
Neil, I'm glad you pushed that through. I was hoping we'd get to it. So we got 5 more minutes.
Yeah, we'll open it up then to some questions. Ed, Marcy.
So I'm going to chime in here. So the one thing, I just want to read one comment, Rick, that came in from you for you. I don't know that it deserves a huge response, but it was from Francis at Westcog. And he said, you know, we may want to consider light sky analysis, dark sky protection when the project gets into the later stages. So he wants us to keep that on the forefront. And then I do have one raised hand from Rudy Marconi from Ridgefield. Rudy?
Yes, thank you, Marcy. One last question, and that is the collaboration with the state of New York and the 684-84 interchange. And I want to be sure with Andy's retirement, I don't know who will be filling that, but hopefully that communication stays open for a coordinated effort in this area. Thank you.
Rudy,
Yes,
absolutely.
I just put up on the slide, Kevin will be taking his place, and so he'll keep that coordination going. But if somebody wants to address the New York coordination.
Yeah, I mean, I can chime in. And Rudy, I was a part of that. I set up that New York meeting that we had before, and we will continue to work with the New York counties and municipalities on, as they wish and as we feel we have new information to provide them. It was a great meeting.
Just wanted to get it into the minutes. That's
Yeah,
all.
no,
Everything's fine.
it hasn't gone away, and we will bring Kevin up to speed so that he knows exactly what we've done. And Andy and Kevin work very closely at the department together on multiple projects. So it's not like we're bringing in a newbie.
And we've got Andy's cell number, so
Yeah, exactly. We can just stalk him,
Thank you.
So and then Frank, I also see that you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just a quick thing, because like slides 41, 42, and 45, when you showed going through the three things that we discussed today, fatal flaw, engineering, environmental, when you put the concept numbers on, I know this was a conceptual slide, instead of main 1, 2, and 3, you're going to have the actual current concepts listed, not main 1, 2, and 3, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So we'll look by segment. We'll have all the concepts that fit into that segment, and we'll go through every one of the concepts we talked about, engineering, environmental, and rate them green, yellow, or red.
Good.
And that will be the focus of our next meeting. We're going to put all of this into the machine, which is our brains, and come back with that analysis. We wanted to make sure today that we were considering the right things, and that there wasn't anything that we had not included in that analysis that folks wanted to see. But the input's been fantastic.
So I do want to recognize that, Marcy, that Barry had a comment. He couldn't unfortunately join us. He did send a comment through email, so I did the liberty of responding back to him. So we just want to acknowledge that as part of the recording of this meeting, that there was a comment from Barry.
Yeah, and it basically says that his question was, what has been the evolution since the last meeting of exit 5, and does the service get in the middle of the I-84 stand? So we'll put that in the meeting log. So we will make sure it's recorded. And then I have one more raised hand. I know we're getting at 1:59 and we're so close, but Chris, you have 1 minute.
Oh, it's ticking down.
Maybe not. Chris, you want to chime in? I see you have your hand raised.
Maybe not.
No, maybe not.
All right, maybe he. Okay, so we are good.
For all those people who didn't think
for
we were
another
gonna...
minute or two, just to make sure everyone gets off safely.
We got one more, Marcy, I believe.
Tom. Oh, Tom just chimed in. Perfect.
I just wanted to say that I know everybody's working very hard on this, but it just seems like we're getting more and more comments about the congestion, the delays, and it's a daily thing, through Danbury, 84 through Danbury. Everybody that can avoids driving through 84 in Danbury. I hear it from so many people. So I hope that we can, go to construction sooner than later, because it's we need these improvements now.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Just to quickly address that, yeah, Tom, we are, I think we kind of showed that at previous PAC meeting. We are looking at some of those business options at transportation systems management. Did I get that right, Sharat? I think so.
Measured operations.
In terms of operations. Yeah. Forgot the operations, but we are looking at some of those options, which we may be able to implement on a much quicker time frame.
For all of those who didn't think we would make it under the 2 o'clock wire, we managed to do it by the skin of our teeth.
And I want to thank everybody for these for the comments. Fabulous discussion. I appreciate it.
Wait, so I hang on, Rick, for one more second. Chris chimed off and is now back on. I just want to make sure that his question, if he has one last question, gets asked. Everyone else can sign off.
Chris, you back on?
You know, Teams has been really wacky this week, and I know a few people have gotten to the point where for some reason when their mute like gets grayed out and they can't. So that could be what's going on with Chris. I had that happen to me a couple weeks ago.
All right, well, he's not chiming in, so I think we're done. Thank you, everyone. Rick, you did phenomenal, and this was a really great meeting with lots of wonderful input.
It was awesome. Thank you very much.
Good.
Nice
Thank
job,
you.
guys.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
everyone.
Rainy day, everyone.